Evening with a keynote, and then for adults we'll have a panel discussion, and the kids will have middle school kids and high school kids will have an activity down in the fellowship hall. But I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Emily Schmidt. She's here with us from AFSP, and she will do a little more introducing than that. So thank you, Emily.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you guys for having me tonight. Mental health and suicide prevention is not only important to me because I'm a part of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, but full-time I'm a teacher. So I teach high school students. I'm a freshman teacher predominantly, and I have sophomores, so I see how mental health is prevalent in the lives of all of these students, in the lives of their parents, in their siblings. And so I really appreciate having you guys having me tonight. I wanted to give you a little bit background about me before I go into this because I think it's nice to know who the heck is talking to me. I also like to preface this with, I shared some of this presentation with my freshmen and sophomores today, and if you ever want brutal, honest opinions, they will give it to you. And so a little bit about me, I'm a teacher. It's my 4th year in teaching. I was in New Salem my first 2 years, and now I'm at Century High School. I'm back in town. I graduated from BHS, and I went into teaching for the whole purpose of mental health. In middle school, struggled a little bit myself, and if it wasn't for my teachers, I can tell you I wouldn't be standing here today because they helped save my life. And I have a huge family. I like to say we're growing. And my mom says I have 5 kids, but every single kid was different. So how we go about treating mental health and suicide prevention is going to be so different and unique for all of our kids and parents and everything involved there. I also am a part of the board now, or the suicide prevention chair for the Bismarck Walk. So if you want to get involved in that, please let me know. Trinity Lutheran was one of our biggest sponsors last year, and we really appreciate those dollars because it allows us to go out into the community, into schools, businesses, to talk to you guys. And the next thing that I want to do, I did have a PowerPoint somewhere, but I have a good memory. Oh, perfect. And so I'd like to say that it's okay to talk about mental health, and I start that off with that because it's such a weird conversation to have. It's great that it's becoming more and more familiar for everybody, but it's still something that we want to have a conversation about, because I was on my way here and I was talking to a friend and they're like, "What are you doing tonight?" I'm like, "I'm going to talk to Trinity Lutheran Church about suicide prevention." And they're like, "You are our suicide prevention friend." And I'm like, "That's great, because now we can have open, honest conversations about it." I've struggled myself with this. I'm very open and honest. I've had 2 suicide attempts, one in high school and one in college, and it's taught myself a lot about myself. It's taught my mom how to deal with it, and my dad. It was always an awkward conversation. They're like, "How do we help our 4th child go about this?" And that's why I said I'm so different than all of my siblings, and my parents are like, we have a whole different look on life now. And I very recently, it's about 2 months ago now, I lost a friend to suicide. And so this is still something that's prevalent in our community and our friends, and it's something that I want to keep talking about. You can skip this side. That was all about me. So today I want to talk to you guys about mental health and what it is. And so there are chemicals in our brains, but then there's also people around us that want to support us. And the more we talk about it, the more we feel comfortable talking about it. And that's the biggest thing about today, is these are things that happen in our heads. It's just like physical health. We need to take care of it, and we need to talk about it. We talk about working out all the time, so why can't we talk about going to therapy or talking to a mentor in our church? One thing that I got out of today when I was sitting in the back is you guys have one of the most accepting parishes I have ever been to. And so I congratulate you guys to that, because that is huge, and I love that you guys are having these conversations. And so here are some stats that I just like to point out, because the more you know, the more it opens your eyes. And so 20% of children aged 13 to 17 have some sort of mental, emotional, some sort of disruption that is happening in their lives. And one of the things that is the scariest to me as a teacher is that 19% seriously consider attempting suicide. That is a huge percentage. It might seem like it's small because it's less than 20, because I'm a math teacher also, but it's still too large. One of the things that I do feel like we are going in the right direction as a country as well is now it's not in the top 10. Suicide is not one of the top 10 leading causes of death. It's now number 11. And I want to keep bringing that down, and that's why I'm here today to talk to you guys, because we are having these conversations, and it is just keeps going down and down. The one thing about suicide is it's one of the most preventable deaths. And so that's why we're having this conversation, and I think it's so great. 16% of people have made a suicide or have made a plan to attempt suicide, and it's amazing that 44, it's increasing, but it's decreasing at the same time. That's one of the biggest things. So 2 things that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is seize the awkward and talk away the dark. Trinity Lutheran, your guys' name last year in our suicide prevention was Bring the Light. And I think that's one of the best things is we're bringing to light this disorder, this stigma that we have going on. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do. That's what Seize the Awkward and Talk Away the Dark is about. It's how are we going to have these conversations? Because how do you bring up to someone that you think you see the warning signs? How do you bring up to them, are you having suicidal thoughts? Are you okay with your mental health? Are you getting the help that you need? And so we have 2 programs with AFSP that we offer to businesses, to schools, anywhere that is willing to listen to us. We're coming in and we're talking to you guys about it. So I'm going to talk to you guys about them a little bit. So Seize the Awkward, what is it? It's how do we have these conversations? And one thing that I knew with my parents, my mom has been very open and honest with me now because she was like, you were only in 8th grade when we started having mental health issues. And now that I'm 25, she's like, I can tell you what was going through my mind. And she goes, I felt like one of the most hopeless people. That's broken anyways. I felt like one of the most hopeless people out there because I had a daughter and I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know who to ask for help. I didn't know what to do. And so with Seize the Awkward, we're having some of these conversations of how do you ask for help? How do you bring it up? And that's one of the best things is you can just ask somebody to go and work out if you want. You can ask them to cook dinner, and you just have these conversations, and you ask them, are you okay? And that's such a subtle comment, but one of the best things about it is it's an open-ended comment. And that's what we want to have these conversations is you want them to lead into discussions. And that's what my mom always told me. She goes, I asked you if you were okay and you just shrug it off. And I go, but the one thing you did is you kept persisting to have this conversation. You took a step back from when I needed it, but then she came back. And that was one of the biggest things that I'm like, you were there for me, and that's exactly what I needed. And she did everything she possibly could. And I know I have a lot of parents in the crowd, and that's why I bring up my mom and dad a lot. My dad was always like, I'm a male, I don't know how to have this conversation. He's like, my daughter is going through this, what do I do? And I was like, you were just there for me. You were physically in the room, you were by my side. And I knew if I needed to go anywhere, I needed to turn to anybody, I was able to turn to my parents. And that's what I know a lot of you parents are to your child. And I know I have a lot of high school or middle school students in here, and I also like to talk to you guys because I have students that sit in my classroom every day, and they're like, how do I tell my friend that they're not being the same and I know something is wrong? Because they're like, I feel like they're gonna think I'm attacking them. You're not attacking them. They know that you're not attacking them. They know that you're there for their well-being. And so that's what the Seize the Awkward conversations are about. It's gonna be an awkward conversation because how are you bringing up someone's life in your conversation without offending them? And you're not going to. It's gonna be awkward, I can tell you that for a fact, but that's why we say seize that awkward moment. Have those hard conversations because it could be honestly the matter of life and death, and we want everybody here with us. We all have a plan in life, and that's why I'm here today, is my road has led me to talking with you guys, and that's what Seize the Awkward is all about. The next one is Talk the Dark Away, and this is 4 ways to start a conversation about mental health. So it doesn't have to be just about suicide prevention. It doesn't have to be, are you okay, because I feel like we are going in the wrong direction. It can just be to check in on your friends, on your family members. And sometimes I have kids that come to me and they're like, I have an adult in my life I'm worried about. What do I do? And so these are some great resources. It's just asking, them, who do you reach out to when you need someone? Do you have someone in your life? I know in my life right now, if I was having any kind of mental crisis, I can go to my mom, my dad, and my fiance. I also know that I have my siblings that are there to support me. It was amazing being in the walk chair for the first time last year. I had that family support surrounding me, and I knew they were there because they always just randomly checked in on me and saying, hey, do you need any extra support? And that's all it takes, and we all have phones now, and so it takes 2 seconds to send a text message to someone and say, hey, I'm thinking about you. What can I do to help you? Or I know I see you that you are overwhelmed. Is there anything that I can help you with to make a list? And that's one of the biggest things with having these conversations is having those open-ended conversations with someone when they are like, what do I do? And it's like, okay, I don't know what I can do personally, and that's what I always like to say. I'm an expert in certain things. I'm an expert, I can teach you math all day long, but I can't always help you. I'm not a mental health professional, but I know who I can guide you towards. And so it might not be that you have all the answers, but it might be that you have the direction to steer them in. And I know you have so many mentors here that are here to help you. Allow them to help you. And on the next slide, how can we help prevent suicide? One of the biggest things I hear is, I don't want to bring it up because I don't want to trigger some ideas in their head. If it is not in their head already, you are not going to bring that up. It's actually shown in studies that if you ask someone talking about any level of distress or suicidal thoughts, they are going to be more willing to get that help. They just need to know that someone is there to help them, that's going to guide them and give them the support. Most of the time, they are just looking for someone to be with them. And that's all it takes, is are you having suicidal thoughts? And that's all it takes for them to be like, okay, I know someone else either has gone through it, and that's why they're asking me, or I know they care enough about me to have this conversation. And the biggest thing is listening intently without judgment. I say that because we're fixers as people. We want to fix the issue, we want to fix the problem, but sometimes we just need to get it out, and we listen to them, and then we take the next step of, okay, here's who we should go to next, and we create these safety plans. It's always creating this group of people around you, and if you don't know who to go to, let's find somebody of who you can go to. Open-ended questions, just like how I said before. Tell me more about that. Tell me what's going on. How are you experiencing this? Because the biggest thing that I say is my experiences are different than your experiences. What I've gone through is different than what you've gone through. And so I always like to say you're asking those open-ended questions and you're listening to them. You're not telling them your story. You're not telling them, hey, I went through this, and now you should be feeling the same things. Just because I'm feeling that doesn't mean you're feeling that. And that's the biggest thing, is being open and honest with each other. And then there's not a quick fix. Like I said, I started going through my mental health journey when I was in 8th grade, and I'm now 25. This is not something that we can just fix instantly, but there are plans and people we can put into place. And one of the best things that I see on the Wednesday nights is my favorite thing to see is you guys gathering here together, because this could be someone's support. This could be somebody's reach out. And that's exactly what we're trying to create. We're trying to create these boundaries and these commitments to people. The next thing is, what can you do if you are in a mental health crisis? And one of the biggest things that I'm so excited for, and it's the 2nd or 3rd year, I believe, that 988 is a number. And so it's just like 911. If you are in a mental health crisis, or you feel like you need support and you can't talk to anybody around you, 988 is a number you can call or text at any time of the day. It's 24/7. You can also go on their website, and they will have somebody who is there to listen to you and help give you people that this is who you need to reach out to next. And they're from all over the world, they're all volunteer-based, and that's also where some of our dollars go for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Out of the Darkness Walk, which is why we're so happy that you guys are becoming a part of this conversation. And just reach out, find your people, find who you guys need help with, and find those comfortable people. I tried to talk really fast, and sometimes I'm all over the place. My freshmen are like, what is happening in front of me sometimes? So hopefully it wasn't like that experience for you. But I did want to leave some time to answer some questions. Like I said, I might not know the answer, but I like to have those conversations. It's opening a window, and I might be able to point you in the right direction. And so I know I talked really fast. I like to say that. But do you guys have any questions about anything I talked about, or any supports that maybe you don't know Bismarck has that I can answer for you or help have that conversation? Yes?
Not directly related to
Yeah.
that. I'm just wondering, have there been studies done regarding social media since the advent of social media?
Yes.
Would you say it has had a more positive or negative impact as to how people communicate with one another, whether it be in healthy ways or aggressive ways or
Yes.
adversarial ways?
Yes. So there have been studies that have been happening, and AFSP is one of the top leaders in that research. And as a teacher, and this is my opinion, I can tell you this, I've seen the good and the bad side. It's definitely with the students that I've had in my classroom, they go online and they see this perfect person. We only see the good side of people, and so we think that we have to be perfect. But really, there's so many different angles that are happening in their lives, and you don't want to go on social media and share the bad of what's happening in your life. You don't want to say, I'm struggling on social media. And so I've definitely seen both sides of it. There are research going on where it's not a super helpful tool, but there are also good things about it with the telehealth. So there are therapists that you can't get into because we're all booked out in Bismarck. We don't have a ton of things. But there are therapists that you can meet with online through telehealth that is super helpful and beneficial, and we have those connections through our online social media. So it's definitely how we have these conversations and how we also teach ourselves and our kids how to use social media healthy. It's really easy to send a text or send a comment on Facebook when you don't see that person's emotional reaction. And so I can say it's definitely not one of the best things, and it's definitely going towards that, but it also can be a very helpful thing as long as we understand how to use it appropriately. Thank you for asking. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah.
I also lost, sorry to hear about your friend.
Thank you.
I also lost a friend this year who died by suicide. And I think there's another layer to all of this, and that is you got the talking about
Yes.
bad things happen,
Yes.
and being that support for friends and families.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I do, and I'm so happy you asked that, and thank you so much for asking that, is what do we do after we have lost someone to suicide? It's a hard conversation to have, and I say everyone grieves so differently. How I know these parents are grieving is very different to the significant other of our friend who we lost, and one of the best things that AFSP has to offer is it's called Healing Conversations, and so you can go online on AFSP website, and you can set up meetings with people who have lost someone the same way you have. And you can have that conversation with them of the emotions that you're going through. And there are so many different layers of grief that you go through. And it's having someone who's lost someone the same way you have, of understanding that. So there are definitely resources out there. I think there's a table back there as well that has the resources on there. And so there are different resources of healing conversations, but then also just having this open conversation with your friends, of checking in on them. I know we're having a celebration of life with our friend group next weekend, and we're just sharing out, okay, this has happened, how do we prevent it from happening to anybody else in our friend group, and now how do we heal as a group? It's definitely not something that happens overnight, it's not something that happens over a month, sometimes it can take a few years. And so having these opportunities of these different programs is where it definitely is helping us. I hope that answered your question. Thank you for asking. I think I have time for one more, but I don't know. Okay, one more. If anybody else has one. I really appreciate you guys asking, and I really appreciate you guys having these conversations. I know it's not something super comfortable to talk about in public, and so if you guys have any questions, I know I'll be here a little bit later on, but I want to thank you guys again for being willing and having these conversations with you guys. So thank you.
So we'll transition now. Thank you, Emily. That was great. Thank you. Emily's going to lead our middle schoolers, our confirmation class, in their activity down in the fellowship hall. So confirmation and any other youth can head down there. I just want to, as we transition into our panel discussion, we have a couple things out on the table out there. One is a Hope Nickel. Emily talked about 988, and this is has that information on it. It also has something that you can share with other people. So grab one of those or a couple of them and share with people. We also have our You Matter, Jesus Says So cards, so grab some of those and share those with folks. On the other side, for those of you that have not seen these, they have our worship times and our information for Trinity Lutheran. So grab some, we have lots, and share those with others. So if we could have our panelists come on up.
I think we're probably okay. You want to sit on the end? So my name is Steve Leibel. I'm going to be kind of the moderator for this panel. What the task force tried to do is we tried to pick a group of people that represent some diverse perspectives. And you'll hear that everyone has a little bit different observation, different experiences. And part of what we're really trying to get at with this is to, first of all, to raise awareness in our community that this isn't something that's isolated to, bigger cities or someplace else, but it does happen here. The other thing is to come up and to have a conversation about what, as a congregation, we can do to help, support people that are struggling with mental illness, because it is, something that as North Dakotans and as Lutherans we don't like to talk about, but it absolutely is all around you in the pews, it's at your workplace, it's in the schools, it's everywhere. And so a way we can be a more welcoming and caring congregation is something that is at least a little bit of support that we can do. So I'm going to start by asking some questions of our panel. We will have, I believe, some cordless microphones. So at any time, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hands. So, this is not meant, they don't have speeches. This is just going to be kind of a more informal conversation. I'm going to start with Elizabeth Schmidt-Kuntz to talk about, first, if you could give a little bit of background about, where you work, who you are, that sort of thing.
Yes, I'm Elizabeth Schmidt-Kuntz, and I am a school social worker in the Bismarck Public Schools. I work at Grimsrud Elementary, so specifically with elementary students and families, and have for about a little over 11 years. Also had some experience in the hospital setting, psychiatric partial care as well.
Okay, and so what I'm intending to do is ask a question of you, and then we'll move on to the next panelist, and then we'll come back, kind of keep this as a circular thing. So the question I had is, based on your experience and you're in the elementary schools, what have you observed to be, what sort of impacts have you observed arising from issues of mental health or substance abuse?
I think sometimes it's hard to tell which one comes first because sometimes there are so many struggles and lack of just basic needs that can lead to mental health and substance abuse issues, but also mental health and substance abuse can also lead to those same things. So I feel like it has, what I have seen is a large impact of them back and forth, and then ultimately impacting all of our systems. So when we have such high amount of people struggling with mental health and substance abuse, our systems of child welfare and public health systems and hospitals and therapists, it just gets, there's so many going on that we're out of people and options for support. And it's hard to continue to support those things when those systems are over.
So I think it's pretty common that myself and I think most people, when you think of mental health issues, you don't think of an elementary school. Do you see, the kind of, or let me ask it this way, what kind of mental health issues do you see in an elementary school?
I would say I see way more than I ever thought I would. Everything from depression, anxiety, of course, different attention deficit, hyperactivity, those types of pieces. But it can look so different in kids too. And so we don't get to a lot of some of the big stuff, but I mean, there can be even the really big bipolar, schizophrenia, things that young kids are dealing with, or their families are, and it's affecting them as well.
Is it fair to say that, some of the kids that you see are coping with kind of the ripple effect of substance abuse or mental health in their immediate family?
Yes, I would say definitely. When they come to school, we always talk about we all bring our own backpack and whatever's all in there, we're bringing with us, and you can see it, whether that's quick to get angry or it's really hard to focus on math when you didn't get to eat because there's nothing in the house and mom can't get out of bed because she's struggling to just wake up and do function herself. And so you see those things just carry over.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to Sergeant Heinert, and if you could first give me a little bit of a background on kind of what your role is at the Bismarck Police Department, as well as, the type of work you do.
Well, first, thanks for not saving me for last. I thought I was going to be last. So, my name is Darren Heinert. I'm a Bismarck native. I'm in my 27th year of law enforcement, my 20th year with Bismarck Police Department. I'm currently assigned to the Field Services Division, so I'm a patrol supervisor. In addition to that, with the supervisory and being out on the street, I'm also the team leader for the SWAT team's negotiation team, which you can about imagine the types of people we deal with there, and also the CIT coordinator for the department, which is crisis intervention team, dealing with people with mental illness, chemical dependencies, homelessness, things of that nature.
Okay. How many, I want to know a little bit more about the interventional, what did you call it at the very
Crisis intervention, CIT.
Okay. The crisis intervention, so how large is that team at the Bismarck Police Department?
It's still growing. We have, I've coordinated the by last count was 9 classes that focuses on law enforcement and first responders in the Bismarck, Mandan, Burley, Morton area. And we have trained about 120 first responders. And that's a 40-hour week that we teach basic crisis intervention skills for how to assess the situation, things that we can do to, I guess, not isolate, but come to a resolution and maybe get somebody some services and try to divert from correctional facilities if possible.
So how often, and I'll just say per week, how often does in Bismarck, that crisis intervention team get called into action?
We don't have a team per se, but we have officers that
Okay.
will step up and take those calls that involve those types of things. And without giving you a number, I can say it's multiple calls daily.
Okay.
That's day and night.
So I want to next, I'm going to jump to Mr. Braun, Colby Braun, who is, I understand, was recently in the paper for promotion to the Director of Facility Operations. Is that accurate? Did I say that right?
Yeah, now I'm the director of the Department of Corrections.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
So tell me a little bit about your background, maybe before your recent promotion.
Yeah, so I'm actually an elementary ed teacher, went to school, and so I think about where you were at and some of the stuff that you dealt with. Somehow I ended up in prison, and I probably am the result of that. But so I got out of school. I started as a correctional officer at the jail in Dickinson, and we had juveniles there, and so really I thought I was in a teaching role, but I mean, as an officer, it was dealing with people coming off the streets under the influence, kids, because we had federal kids there, dealing with all kinds of issues because they were away from home, many, many miles away, and so really some really difficult times through those years. And then I was actually the warden of the women's prison in New England. And then 2010, we moved to Bismarck, and I was had a couple warden jobs as the warden of the penitentiary for a few years, and then now overseeing the prisons, and then now my current role.
So, and I know this, I recognize this is a really broad question, but in your opinion, what's the biggest impact that you've observed on, and I'm going to limit this to the Bismarck community, from mental illness and substance abuse?
Well, yesterday, Governor Burgum mentioned in his State of the State that he's interviewed, I think, somewhere around 70 judges or attorneys wanting a judgeship over the past 7 years. Out of those people, he said, okay, if we take away mental illness and we take away substance abuse, how many people would that take out of your courts? He said the lowest number he heard was 70%. So when we start thinking about the criminal justice system and the path to people making some of those choices, mental illness and substance abuse, at one point the women that we had in the prison system, 100%, right, of the women had a substance abuse disorder, and 60% had a dual diagnosis. And so in the Bismarck-Mandan area, it's just a microcosm, and generally, and so my world is really in that, in the end route, right? We generally have more people from Bismarck-Mandan in prison than any other area in the state. So you could just take that and just pretty much say that that's what we'd see in Bismarck and Mandan.
Okay. Now, one of the primary goals of the prison system, of course, is rehabilitation. What kinds of resources are available through the system for, those people struggling with substance abuse, for example?
In the prison system?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you think about prison, I mean, the reality is there's about anywhere from 1,000 to 1,400 people leaving prison every year. So you've got 100 to 120 people that at one point came in, now they're coming out. During that time, I mean, one thing that North Dakota has done, and we've done really, really well, is to make sure that people have access to treatment services. If a person needs substance abuse treatment, 100% of the time they receive treatment before they leave. If they need, if they have issues with violence, they'll get conflict resolution 100% of the time. So if they have a sex offense, 100% of the time they're coming out with treatment completed. The reality is, I mean, it's people like Sister Kathleen that it's really about the reentry, right? Because I was thinking about some of this stuff with the community and thinking Bismarck-Mandan. And the guys in prison would make so much fun of me that I actually even question myself, because I talk about community everywhere I go when I talk about it. And I'm like, well, how's a prison guy going to talk about community? Because I mean, and so I know they would just laugh at me, because it's the same, right? Because these people that are living in our prisons are those same exact people that are coming out. They've received treatment. They're on the medications that they need. And now here they are reentering our community. They need the barriers taken out. They need to have the places where they can go, where they get support. They need to be able to get a job, a good job. They need to find a house. They need to find a home. And all of those things are huge barriers for those folks. I don't even know if I answered your question.
You did.
Okay.
You did.
Because I can preach.
No, we're fine with So, Sister Kathleen, if you could give us a little bit of kind of your background for those that don't know you.
Well, I'm from Bismarck my entire life. I started as an elementary teacher also, and I'm presently working at Ministry on the Margins, on the streets and in the prison and jails, and I've been blessed to do that for 10 years. I've been going to the prison for 13 years. I'm one of the longest serving inmates at our Sunday services.
So tell me about Ministry on the Margins. What does that do? What's the service that you're trying to provide to people in this community?
The primary one is what was just sung in that closing song, All Are Welcome. And we really emphasize the all piece for us. We have a Benedictine line that says, let all be received as Christ. I interpret it as you can be high, and you can be drunk, and you can be off your medications. You just can't be a jerk. And I think that's very important. So providing support, a place for safety during the night tonight, food pantry, reentry services. At this time right now, we have some people doing a Bible study in the prison. And one of the most important things that we can do with that presence is I just will say, hey, you see the ugly face here? When you come out, find me. Your family, find me. So we try to do that connection of support in the rehabilitation that they've been talking about.
Okay. So, and I'm going to jump around again back to Mrs. Schmidt-Kuntz. Generally, what are 3 things that, based on your observations and your experience in the school, that you wished more people in the Bismarck community knew?
That's a good question. I really think part of it is just the education and the understanding. A lot of times we hear these myths or, well, why can't you just go get a job? Why can't you just go do this? And it's way harder than that. I think sometimes we think that it's just easy. And so I think education on some of those pieces is very important. One of the big things that I feel has impacted what I do is just building that connection, like you talked about. When I can look a parent in the face and have that conversation and not judge what they're telling me and just listen to the hard that they're dealing with and say, okay, we're going to do this first. And be that support for them or find the support for them, I think is huge. And I think we just need to welcome them as people. Everyone has mental health. And so we're all on a different level and a different stage. And so how would we want to be welcomed if we were dealing with something similar?
Okay. What about more specifically to, elementary age kids that are dealing with mental health issues? What's something that you know that you feel like maybe the general public, like myself, wouldn't be aware of?
I think that it just affects, no matter what age you are, it affects you. And I think we think that we can hide it from our kids, and they know, and they can feel it, and understand more and really, like we had just talked about, really seizing those conversations and being honest with kids. I don't think we realize the thoughts that they start to have so young. And so being that open, caring person to listen to them, I think we kind of get scared as adults to have that with kids, and they need that too.
Okay. And so if, just if you were to give recommendations to us as a congregation right now, just based on what, Mrs. Schmid-Kuntz has seen, what would you say? What would you like us to take away from this if we're, so moved to help or be more aware of what kids are going through?
I think we get involved, learn more about what's going on in our community. I think the other part is just being that person. Whether that's for that parent, you see a little one struggling in the middle of the store, not maybe making the snide comment or the look like, oh man, you don't have that handled, but maybe saying, hey, do you need something? And offering it to that parent, because really we got to help the people to help the kids, the adults, we have to help the kids. And so I think just being a welcoming place, giving them, looking them in the eye and saying we're here.
And by the way, if anyone has any questions for any of our panelists, all you need is a hand raise. So I'm going to jump back to Sergeant Heinert.
Okay.
So as a patrol officer, I imagine that you've, observed a lot of, traumatic and kind of heartbreaking things that can be attributed to mental illness or substance abuse. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
What are some things that you would like, or you wished that more people, just members of the general public, that they knew about what was happening in Bismarck?
I think I thought about this, and it's one answer, and it's the same thing I try to teach to my younger officers, and I know it's going to sound funny coming from a police officer, and we have a younger generation that has a different mindset. You've seen it, Sister Kathleen. To treat people like they're people, and to understand that mental illness does not discriminate. It's I think the stat was 1 in 4 people are affected by mental illness. So, if you look around the room, 1 in 4 people here, you could wake up in the morning or very shortly thereafter have some type of a mental illness. It could be minute, it could be something extreme. And because it doesn't discriminate according to socioeconomic class, sex, race, it doesn't matter. It's across the board, and people need to realize that when your number's called, your number could be called.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you the same question. So part of what Trinity is trying to do is just to be more supportive of people suffering from mental illness or substance abuse. What would be your recommendations to a congregation like that?
Continue to be educated, and maybe next time there's a function such as this, invite one person, and continue to do that, and invite one person, and try to get a bigger group to become more aware of the issues. And becoming more aware of those issues would make people be more comfortable about talking about the issues and getting help.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I'm going to jump back to Mr. Braun. So I'm kind of running through the same questions with everyone. What are some things that you wish that the general public knew about mental illness and substance abuse that you have a little bit different perspective based on your role in the prisons.
You know, I think I'm going to answer it a little bit differently than what I was originally thinking. And correctional officers that work inside our facilities have the highest rate of substance abuse, the highest rate of obesity, the highest rate of divorce, the highest suicide rate of any other demographic, to include active military. And so oftentimes those fences that we have, the people working there are right in those trenches every single day. And they're just like you were talking about, the daily traumas that happen. That same day you might be assaulted by somebody, and that night you got to feed that person supper. And that constant churn is just recognizing that oftentimes correctional employees are viewed in the public. Any TV show you watch, we're the bad guys. We're always the ones that are on the other side. And instead of seeing them as heroes, instead we see them as the bad guy. And that portrayal, I don't think, is fair. And so I think part of what we don't know is how many of the people that are protecting us, our public safety, personnel that are at the Burley Morton Jail, or they're at the penitentiary, or Missouri River Correction Center, or Heart River Correction Center. We have, I would say, no less than 800 correctional employees in Bismarck and Mandan. And just recognizing that those folks are suffering, and trying to find a path to have these conversations, and trying to lift them up and put them somewhere higher than where they generally sit.
Well, and what would be a more specific, I'm kind of a more of a nuts and bolts. What's some more specific things that, the public in Bismarck could do to help support those correctional officers?
Come on out. Come on out to the prison. Come out to Missouri River Correction Center. Try to understand what the job is. We call it the import model. And it's really about the fences hold people in, but they also hold people out. Get curious. Ask questions. Come out. I promise you, I will give you a tour. I will give every single person that ever asks for a tour to come walk through. If you'd rather see the minimum security facility and what that looks like, and we'll go everywhere. We will go to every place that a person wants to go, because it's really, really important that this community understands what's happening there. Because again, every year, 1,400 people, those are new citizens every single year. And we need to understand what the work that's happening there, and trying to get to a point. And it's not easy accepting a lot of the folks that live there, because we judge them on the crime, we don't judge them on the person. And so then that crime is always who they are. And so it's hard to get past it. But once we do, then all of a sudden, people are people. That resident is a resource. That person who lives there is a resource. And it took me 20 years to figure it out. It took me 20 years. It actually took me the peer support program that was happening in the community that I finally said, well, we don't have enough staff. And so we lifted up, I just said, well, let's give the guys the same training. Best decision I ever made as a warden. I've got nurses working in housing units, I've got peer support specialists with lived experience. So I think I didn't even know how I was going to answer that question, but I'm glad I answered it the way you're invited. Come to prison, please. It's a great time. Yeah, don't do 13 years. Don't do 13 years. 2 hours.
Well, it's funny you say that. This morning I was driving on 7th by Sanford, and I saw a officer escorting a prisoner out in chains, and it was all that slushy slop today, and the prisoner was walking up the curb and slipped, and the officer caught him and put his arm around him and helped him up. And just as I was driving by, I saw that, and it was really kind of a profound, wow, that he reached out to help, treated him like another person, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Can I tell one story on that?
Sure.
So, and it was actually sitting here, and I was listening earlier, and I was at the Youth Correction Center today, and I didn't want to tell you what I was doing, but anyway, standing in the hallway, and I see this big African-American kid just standing by a door, and he had his head down. And I see this little white Caucasian, goofy kind of kid, and he's walking, and he looks over, and he stops, and he just looks at him and says, "Are you okay?" to the big kid, and the big kid just kept his head down. And then finally says, "No, are you okay?" And finally the kid gave him a head nod. But I thought about what you were talking about, and I'm like, that's the work that we all have to do. I mean, here this is, and I'm sure that was so intimidating for the young little guy to be like, but just checked on him. And finally, I mean, kind of forcing that eye contact, it was I don't know, it was inspirational for me because it just, I knew the bravery that it took. And so I think that's also something that we have to do is just stop for a second and just make the eye contact.
And Sister Kathleen, so what would be something that you wish, and I know you're involved in the community and you're such a
Little
voice and an
passionate.
advocate, yes.
Yeah.
But if I were to boil down your message to a couple things, what do you wish people in our community understood?
Number one, that mental health issues and addiction are not a choice that you can work your way out of. It's more like it's a chronic illness that you need to be supported in. We have a strong work ethic, and it's like, well, get yourself out of that. You know, as soon as you're done with your addiction, then we'll get you food. And that life just doesn't work that way. So I think that taking that approach, that it's not something to work out of. I think my other concern is that we have taken mental health and addiction and we've criminalized the behaviors. Our strong treatment programs are in our centers of incarceration. That's criminalizing mental health behaviors. So we need to own that and then say, how do we calibrate and address things as they are? Supporting families. 1 out of 24 kids right now went to bed last night or will go to bed tonight with a mom or a dad in jail or prison. That's about 1 in every classroom. And so I think as teachers, as a church community, who is it that has someone that's incarcerated or suffering or homeless, and how are we supporting them? You know, and we don't own that. I've yet to see a chili feed offered by a church because someone's dad is in the prison for a year and the family has financial hardship. You know, it's still an unnamed support that needs to happen. Then a final thing that's going through my mind right now is to look at ourselves, ourselves as the employers, as the apartment owners, and say, am I willing to hire someone who has a record, who is working with mental illness as part of their illness and health? Am I willing to hire someone to give them a chance? Am I willing to rent to somebody that doesn't have a 700 credit score and give them a chance? So if we as people of faith could be people of second chances, so that when someone comes out of the prison or out of treatment with training and education and a belief in themselves, they're not then left outside because no one will take them in. That's all.
Yes.
I'm wondering if any of you have specific thoughts on how COVID has changed and impacted things, and if it seems to be getting better or worse, or where we're at now, since it's been a few years and still some remaining things going on.
I do. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of research talking about the mental health needs of people who have come through the pandemic and how hard it's been on people like me. And I live a pretty darn privileged life. People who were homeless before COVID and are outside tonight still homeless, they've had the same crises but more intense. As we have gone to working from home and technology and assessment, or access to therapy and services and support through technology, the poor who don't have cell phones or internet have been left further out. And so I think I'm seeing a much more devastating continued impact that, we have to name the fact Bismarck has had 3 deaths this winter. All 3 of them were people who would have been left out or trespassed because of addiction and mental health issues. So I think COVID has just exacerbated that, especially for the poor and vulnerable.
Okay, and I'm very appreciative that all of you stayed. We do have our kiddos are running around, they're out of Sunday school. Thank you all so much for coming. It's very appreciated. I know that, we all enjoyed listening to you, so thank you.
And thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Mental Health Task Force for all your work as well.